that lack of experience, that lack of cohesion, that ball watching, the lack of positioning, the opening up of spaces. There were many errors for Indonesia for the Garudas in the first half. If this was the World Cup qualifying squad that made all these errors, the Indonesian fans will be paying for blood. But this is understandable because you really have a largely inexperienced squad competing, many of them competing in their first ever international tournament, even in Southeast Asia. And this is the blooding ground to see whether they can cut it for international football. And Myanmar 0, Indonesia 1. Well, it took a bit more experience in the second half for the Garudas to actually get away with 3 points at the final whistle in Yangon. And actually, to be honest, if you look at this game, this is the first real test for this. If you say under 23 or largely under 21 side experimental team, you can say that they had the 3 points, they had the win, but in terms of performance, it's actually a mixed bag. And I think what I want to emphasize is more on especially those debutants who had a huge baptism of fire thrown into the deep end of international football in the Tuwana Stadium in Yangon this evening in the ASEAN Mitsubishi Electric Cup. And before I elaborate more on it, I would actually like to explain a bit. When it comes to giving players their first senior international cap, it's usually meant for the head coach of the national team to assess whether this player, when thrown into deep end, is he ready to handle the rigors of international football, whether he's able to acquit himself to the intensity of the game compared to what he's used to in club football, where club football is actually more structured, but in international football, sometimes against certain types of opposition, it can be quite varied. I think varied is the better way to describe it. So I think for Indonesia's case, they have 6 debutants. 6 debutants in the starting 11. And these 6 debutants are the starting goalkeeper, Chaya Supriyadi from Bekasi City, 2 centre backs in the 3-man centre back group, Kadek Ariel from Bali United and Donitri Pamungkas from Persija, who partnered alongside his clubmate Muhammad Ferrari, who was the skipper of the day at the start and for the first half. Then while they have a little bit of experience in actually the most cap player in the squad, Pramata Ahan, who actually now has 51 caps after this game, and he's only 22 years old, playing at, you can say, the right wing back. And on the left, another debutant, Achmat Maulana from Arema. So you can see there's a little bit of experience, but a largely very raw set of defenders and wing backs, especially when the skipper of the day, Muhammad Ferrari, only has 5 caps after this match, beforehand 4. Then you move on to the midfield. Anchoring the midfield were Akan Fikri, who came back into the national team after a year's absence, I think. After a year's absence, and another debutant, Alfredo Nico. And in the tag alongside the centre forward, Akan Kaka, you got Hoki Chakara and Marcelino Ferdinand on the left. So in short, this is a mix, but you got 6 debutants, and the inexperience when throwing the deep end, you see who can cope and who can't cope, especially when they came up against a very experienced Myanmar squad, whose only debutant was their starting goalkeeper, Zhao Nini Ong. The rest, I mean, Wong Wong Luin, I think your David Tan and all these people, they have seen all these various levels of opponents in Asia, and they are more experienced in the know-hows of the game. So the first 41 minutes actually showed up a lot of things. Plenty of food for thought for Garuda's coach Shin Tae-yong to think about, especially when Myanmar showed them how to play the international football. With their, you can say gamesmanship, or you can say mainly their experience, but also that little know-how in actually trying to impose yourself in the game, especially when the game is not always going to flow your way. The opponents are smarter, they're going to be a little more cunning, and in Myanmar's case in the first half, they really exploited a few things. Firstly, the inexperience in defense. And the midfield was actually ominously gaping. That was also one of the reasons why Marcelino Ferdinand had such a quiet first half until injury time. The midfield was neither here nor there. It appeared that Akan Fikri was doing more of the work than Nico Afrianto, who really was anonymous and actually, unfortunately, the worst of the 6 starting debutants in the lineup. I mean, when you have such a gap, and then you got your rather nervy back three and your wing backs, it's rather nervy, and their skipper Wong Wong Luin actually exploited it to the full, and they really piled a lot of pressure. Indonesia were definitely better technically. They had more composure when they had the ball, but unfortunately, sometimes they are still trying out their, I wouldn't say trying out their training methods or training plays, the plays that they had set up, but in such games, in such a level of competition, especially the ASEAN Championship, which is or the ASEAN Mitsubishi Electric Cup, you can't afford that level of so-called training mentality into it, because as you can see in the first half, Myanmar really were intense. They were robust in their play. They were very intent at exploiting every little mistake, every space that was afforded to them, and that nervousness showed. Yes, Indonesia were technically more proficient than the Myanmaris, but the nerves were there. In fact, a debutant really bailed them out a few times in this. Chaya Supriyadi. He had to face a number of Myanmar shots in the first half, and he actually was equal to the task. He was one of the reasons why Indonesia came away with a clean sheet at the final whistle. And that first half, when Indonesia were under substantial pressure by Myanmar, who were relentless, he stood firm. Yes, there were a few weaknesses in the way he was catching the crosses, but his anticipation and reflexes were there to see. And that was why Shin Tae-yong gave the Bekasi City second choice goalkeeper a chance to shine on the international stage in the region. And he's definitely by miles, run away, the best debutant in the starting 11. And it actually took Indonesia more than half an hour before they settled into some rhythm of the game, having been adjusted to how the tempo was, given that for these debutants, given an early lesson in how the international game is played, especially in Southeast Asia. There's no time for, you can say, how you play in the World Cup qualifiers. It's not the same as how you play in the Mitsubishi Electric Cup. They are two very different competitions, two very different tempos. Shin Tae-yong definitely has worked it out, given that he has been in charge of the Garudas in a couple of previous campaigns, so he knows what to expect. That's why he called up a few of these young veterans. Yes, they are young. The majority are below the age of 23, except Asnawi, Asnawi Mangkualam, who actually is the oldest in the squad at 25 years old, and who came on in the second half for his 47th cap, and went on to score the winning goal late in the second half. But yes, Asnawi is the oldest player, and he only came on in the second half along with Rafael Struik. That experience, that lack of experience, that lack of cohesion, that ball watching, the lack of positioning, the opening up of spaces. There were many errors from Indonesia for the Garudas in the first half. If this was the World Cup qualifying squad that make all these errors, the Indonesian fans would be paying for blood. But this is understandable because you really have a largely inexperienced squad competing, many of them competing in their first ever international tournament, even in Southeast Asia. And this is the blooding ground to see whether they can cut it for international football. And actually by halftime, it's quite telling that 3 of them obviously did not make the cut. Achmat Maulana, Akan Kaka, and the worst player on the pitch in the first half, Nico Afrianto. They really lasted only just that first half before they were substituted by Asnawi, Struik, and another debutant, Victor Dehan, who slotted into the right wing back, with Pramata shifted to strengthen the midfield anchor with, you can say, Akan Fikri and Marcelino. And you can see what happened in the second half. In the second half, the Garudas actually played the football that they actually displayed in the World Cup qualifiers. There was the tempo, the familiarity of Shin Tae-wook sessions in the final of World Cup qualifying for these players, even though not all of them came on in all the games. It showed, and that tempo was there, the movement was more fluid. Myanmar was struggling to read Indonesian movements compared to the first half, where the movement of the ball, the flow of the ball was a lot more textbook, and where they had to resort to going more directly in the first half. But in the second half, it's a lot more on the ground. Players were moving around. They were making the Myanmar players very confused because they were switching in a few positions, especially when they keep cutting the low balls, through balls on the flanks, particularly on the left where Struik was at his most threatening. Although he did not score, but he caused enough problems to unsettle the Myanmar defense, who were really tiring. And eventually, again, the long throws, the set plays, the secret weapons, you can say the coaching play a part. But the added experience, the extra experience of what they had in the first half was instrumental. The familiarity with what Shin Tae-wook expects from them on the pitch, the familiarity with how the tactical setup, the set plays, the movement of the ball with the ball is supposed to be, given that he has been with them for a number of years. They know the standards that he holds, and these senior youngsters, they live up to it. Marcelino was a lot more alive in the second half, and it was also a combination of the right substitutes, with eventually another debutant, Robbie Darwish, coming on for his first cap as well. Robbie Darwish, who actually slotted in quite nicely at DM actually. So it worked quite seamlessly to the point that you can say they eventually got a goal in the 76th minute. Again, a long throw, but this time from Darwish. Another confusion in the melee, and Asnawi was there at the right place at the right time to smash the ball home, deflected in via a goalkeeper, but the goal is still a goal. And by then, the Myanmar players, unfortunately, they were lacking in, you can say, they lost that momentum they had in the first half. They lost the advantage because they were not sharp in front of goal. They were rather wild in their shooting. If they had been more clinical in the first half, it would have been game over for the young Garudas. But still, the result matters. Shin Tae-yong's side now, young guns now got the first 3 points of the group stage. But it's a very difficult game for them. Ultimately, the inexperience showed the lack of composure from the young ones, although the two young centre backs stayed on until the rest of the game and they acquitted well. Especially Kadek Ariel, he was actually quite a threat at the other end, and he forced a big save from the Myanmar goalkeeper after yet another long throw-in. Yes, if you give them enough time to acquit themselves and to show what they can do, I mean, it's not just playing the ball out from the back and being comfortable with it. It's to gain the confidence you need. When your team is in front and there are more young seniors ready to guide them on the nuances of the international game, it's a lot easier for the remaining debutants who are on the pitch to settle down, to play to their ability. And here's also the reality. Despite the win, I think one or two of the three debutants who were sub out in the first half, they are unlikely to feature again for the rest of the campaign, because sometimes you only have that one game to show that what you can do, just that one game, and they flunk it. And it's going to be very hard for them to, you can say, win back the trust of Shin Tae-yong to say, okay, I'm going to fill you in another game, and most likely it could be against Laos, to show what you can do for the second time, the second chance. Because ultimately, when you're in the tournament, it's about results. It's no longer about having 4 glorified friendly games in the group stage. I think that's not exactly going to cut it. But again, yet the paradox of it is, when Shin Tae-yong only has this handful, less than 10, of these experienced and semi-experienced young players in the squad, there's going to be a added conundrum, because if you, from the next game, they start fielding your Streaks, your Asnawis, along with the other seniors who were there from the start, and one of them gets injured halfway through the campaign, can the replacements step up? Can the replacements do the job? Especially those who are very raw. This is the beauty of it, or rather, this is the puzzle that Shin Tae-yong has to solve. Because ultimately, this tournament, yes, Indonesia, the generally under 21 team do want to go for the win, but it's also about building a bigger base for the future Garudas when Shin Tae-yong leaves, and then you have that foundation of these Garudas whom the incoming national coach of Indonesia, whenever it happens, to count on. But for now, for this experiment, it's mixed. But still, congratulations to the Garudas for their first 3 points of the campaign. I do look forward to see how the rest of their group stage evolves, because this is going to be an interesting path ahead, especially before the last few final World Cup qualifiers resume in March and June. I think Shin Tae-yong wants to find out who among this lot of young players, apart from those who are already there, your Asnawis, your Pramata Ahans, and your Hockey Chakaras, who else can he rely on to go into the real A team when the intense fight to join Japan for the 2026 World Cup finals comes again. And for now, I can say that the jury is still out for many of these young debutants. But for Chaya Supriyadi, he has already cemented his place as the first choice goalkeeper for the rest of this tournament, barring any injury. And I do not expect any radical change in the back three of Ferrari, Kadek, and Pamukkas, 23 Pamukkas. But I think Shin Tae-yong will still continue to tinker quite a bit to see what other options he has at his disposal. Having seen them through in the under 23 level, especially in the Asian AFC under 23, where he led them all the way to 4th place last year and into the final Olympic playoffs. Do they really have what it takes to play against the big boys when the real test matter, or even when Vietnam comes around, and eventually perhaps a semi-final against Thailand? do they have what it takes? I think that's the real answer that Shin Tae wants to find out from the untested ones. Not all have passed this time, but there are a couple of promising signs. Robbie Davis could end up being a more than useful big part player. I think he'll be more of an impact substitute. He showed his steadiness, his ability to have that long throw from the left. It's a valuable asset, and I think this is where I look forward to their next game. Good evening.